A billionaire forced a nurse to marry at gunpoint, but the wedding night changed everything. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's continue the story. The storm outside the Ward estate roared like a beast. Thunder cracked against the night as lightning flashed across the marble walls. Inside the grand study, the air was thick with the smell of burning wood and fear. Claire Monroe stood trembling, her white nurse's uniform soaked from the rain, her eyes darting between the man by the fireplace and the black pistol glinting on his desk. Ethan Ward, the billionaire CEO of Ward Biotech, looked nothing like the polished philanthropist the world worshipped. His tie hung loose, his jaw clenched, and his voice was low, lethal, controlled. "Marry me," he said, sliding a thick contract across the table. "Call it protection or call it punishment. The choice is yours." Claire stared at the document, her heart pounding. She had just come off a double shift at the charity hospital when two men in black suits dragged her here. She had no idea why, until she saw the letter on the table, bearing her mother's name. Her mother was in critical condition, awaiting heart surgery that had been delayed for weeks. Ward Biotech controlled the funding for that hospital, and now the man behind it all stood before her, offering a cure disguised as a curse. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Ethan's blue eyes narrowed. "Because you are the only person I can trust not to love me." He turned away, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. "Sign it, and your mother gets the surgery first thing tomorrow. Refuse, and she dies waiting." Claire felt her knees weaken. The smell of smoke mixed with the scent of fear. Her pulse drummed in her ears. "This is insane," she said, her voice cracking. "You cannot force someone into marriage." Ethan's lips curved into something between a smirk and a wound. "Money forces everything, Miss Monroe. You, of all people, should know that." The words stung like ice. Claire looked at the pen beside the contract, then at the gun gleaming beneath his hand. Her father had always told her that dignity was the last thing a person could lose. But dignity could not buy medicine. Pride could not restart a failing heart. Her eyes blurred with tears as she whispered, "If I sign this, will you keep your word?" Ethan looked up, his face unreadable. "You have it in writing." He slid the pen toward her. The thunder roared again, shaking the chandelier overhead. Her trembling hand reached out, fingers brushing against the cold metal pen. With one stroke, her name bled across the paper like surrender. Ethan exhaled slowly, pocketed the gun, and said softly, "Congratulations, Mrs. Ward." For a moment neither of them spoke. Only the sound of rain against the windows filled the silence. Claire could barely breathe as the weight of her decision sank in. She had just married a man she barely knew, under the shadow of a gun and a promise she was not sure she believed. Ethan extinguished his cigarette, his expression unreadable. "The ceremony is at dawn," he said. "You will wear the dress waiting upstairs. My lawyer will handle the rest." As he left the room, his footsteps echoed like a verdict. Claire stood alone, clutching the contract, her reflection trembling in the window pane. Outside, lightning split the sky in two. She whispered to herself, "What have I done?" The night seemed to answer with silence, a silence that carried the weight of secrets yet to be revealed. And as the rain fell harder, the ink on her signature began to dry, binding her not just to a man, but to a destiny neither of them could escape. Now, let's go back to our main character. The morning light crept through the tall windows of the Ward estate, soft but cold, touching the edge of the contract that had sealed Claire Monroe's fate. The rain had stopped, yet the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Downstairs, servants moved quietly, preparing for a ceremony that should have been filled with love but now reeked of fear and obligation. In the guest room upstairs, Claire stood before a mirror, wearing the silk wedding dress that had been laid out for her by strangers. It fit perfectly, which somehow made it worse. Her reflection looked like someone else, someone trapped between guilt and survival. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the small cross necklace that had belonged to her mother. "Just one day at a time," she whispered, the words barely reaching her own ears. The knock on the door came softly, followed by the voice of the housekeeper. "It is time, Mrs. Ward." The name made her stomach twist. She followed down the marble staircase, her heart pounding with every step. At the end of the hall, Ethan Ward waited in a black suit, immaculate and unreadable. The same man who had threatened her mother's life now stood like a groom out of a magazine, except his eyes carried a storm that refused to fade. The officiant began the ceremony with an efficient calm, reading words that felt hollow in the vast room. When asked if she took this man as her husband, Claire's voice trembled but did not break. "I do." Ethan's response was steady, a simple "I do," like a signature on another business deal. The exchange of rings was quick, cold. The metal against her skin felt like a shackle. When it was done, applause did not come. Only silence. Ethan turned to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Your mother's surgery is scheduled for noon. I keep my word." Claire blinked back tears, her voice caught between gratitude and resentment. "Thank you," she said softly, though it hurt to mean it. That afternoon, Ethan kept his promise. The hospital transfer was approved within hours. Claire was allowed to visit, escorted by a driver. Watching her mother being wheeled into the operating room broke something in her. For the first time in days, she cried without restraint. The doctors reassured her that the surgery was funded and handled by the best team available. She knew who had made that possible, and it only deepened the confusion inside her. When she returned to the estate that evening, Ethan was in his office, standing before the same fireplace where their twisted deal had begun. He looked tired, not from work but from something heavier. "Your mother is stable," he said quietly without turning around. "The surgery went well." Claire nodded, clutching the hem of her dress. "I do not understand you," she said. "You act like a monster, but then you save her life." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, finally facing her. "Maybe I am both." He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light. "You think I enjoy this? You think forcing you into marriage makes me proud? I did what I had to do." "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. "You have all the power, all the money. What could possibly be worth this?" He stared into his glass for a long time before answering. "Trust," he said finally. "Everyone around me lies. Every contract, every smile, every word bought and paid for. I needed someone who could not be bribed, someone who would hate me enough to tell me the truth." Claire's eyes filled with disbelief. "So you destroyed my life to find honesty?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I gave you something too, your mother's life." She took a step closer, anger flickering beneath her grief. "That does not make you a savior. It makes you cruel." For a moment his mask cracked. "Maybe," he said, voice low, "but at least now I am not alone in my cruelty." The firelight danced across his face, making him look both powerful and haunted. Claire turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Stay in this house. You will have everything you need except freedom." She looked over her shoulder, her eyes fierce. "Then that makes us even," she said. "You may have taken my freedom, but you lost your soul doing it." The words hit him harder than she knew. When she walked away, the room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the fire. Ethan looked down at the empty glass in his hand and whispered to himself, "Maybe she is right." Outside, the city lights blinked in the distance, unaware that behind those mansion walls, two lives had just been bound together by power, pain, and a truth neither was ready to face. As night fell again, the echo of her voice lingered in his mind, and for the first time, Ethan Ward wondered if he had made the greatest mistake of his life. Now, let us return to our main character. Days turned into weeks inside the Ward estate, and Claire Monroe began to understand what life as Mrs. Ward truly meant. Every morning she woke up to silence, breakfast trays left outside her door by invisible staff, and an ocean of marble hallways that led nowhere. The mansion was beautiful but cold, like a museum built for ghosts. Ethan Ward had buried himself in work, holding endless meetings behind closed doors. She rarely saw him except during dinners that felt more like negotiations than meals. He would sit across the long oak table, reading reports while she stirred her soup in silence. Sometimes she would catch him staring at her when he thought she was not looking, but his eyes always looked away too quickly, as if he were afraid of what he might find there. One afternoon, Claire wandered into the west wing of the mansion and discovered a locked room. Dust gathered on the handle, and a faded brass plate read "Private." Something about it pulled at her curiosity. Later that night, when the staff had retired, she returned with a bobby pin from her hair. The lock gave way with a soft click. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the faint scent of paper and memory. On the walls hung photographs Ethan, younger, smiling beside a woman with bright eyes and a child in her arms. The woman's face was hauntingly familiar. Claire had seen it before, on the edge of newspaper clippings about the Ward family tragedy. Ethan's fiancée had died 5 years ago in a car crash that had also killed their unborn child. Claire felt a pang of guilt for invading a wound that was not hers. She was about to leave when she heard footsteps behind her. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You should not be in here," he said quietly. Claire froze, unable to speak. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "I did not mean to pry," she whispered. I was lost." Ethan's eyes softened for the briefest moment, then hardened again. "We are all lost in this house, Mrs. Ward," he said. "Some of us just choose better rooms to hide in." He stepped inside, glancing at the photograph she had been staring at. "Her name was Lila," he said finally. "She was supposed to be my forever." The confession slipped out like something unplanned, and for the first time his voice did not sound like steel. Claire hesitated, then asked, "Is that why you brought me here? Because I remind you of her?" Ethan's gaze met hers, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "No," he said. "I brought you here because I needed someone who could not leave." The honesty in his words cut deeper than any lie. Claire's heart ached not with love, but with pity. She realized then that beneath his arrogance and cruelty lived a man terrified of losing control, of losing anyone again. That night she could not sleep. Rain began to fall softly outside, tapping against the glass like a slow heartbeat. From her window she saw Ethan standing on the balcony, a drink in his hand, staring out into the storm. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out. "You will catch a cold," she said gently. Ethan glanced over, surprised to see her. "After everything I have done, you still worry about me." She shrugged. "Maybe I just cannot help it. Nursing is hard to turn off." He gave a tired laugh, one that held no real joy. "Do you believe people can change, Claire?" he asked. "Not easily," she said, "but I think pain forces us to." He looked down at the glass in his hand. "When Lila died, I swore I would never let myself need anyone again. But then you showed up, desperate, stubborn, unbreakable. You reminded me of what I used to be before the money, before the masks." His words startled her. There was no arrogance, only exhaustion. "You do not need to punish others to heal yourself," she said softly. "Letting go is not weakness, Ethan." He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, his eyes did not hold anger or control, they held sorrow. The next morning, Claire found a small vase of white lilies outside her door. No note, no signature, just a silent gesture that made her chest tighten. It was the first kindness he had shown her since that night by the fire. But kindness in the Ward estate was never simple. Later that day, Ethan's lawyer arrived, handing Claire a new document to sign. It was a revised clause in their marriage contract. She skimmed it quickly, her pulse rising when she reached the final line. Clause 10, either party may dissolve the marriage at will, without penalty. Her hands trembled. For the first time, she realized Ethan was offering her a way out. Yet, as she held the pen, she hesitated. Freedom was within reach, but something in her heart whispered that maybe the real prison was not the mansion, it was what still lingered between them, unspoken, unfinished. Now, let us return to our main character. The following weeks felt different, like the air inside the Ward estate had shifted. The cold tension that once filled every corridor began to fade, replaced by something Claire Monroe could not quite name. Ethan Ward was still distant, but the edge in his voice had softened. The breakfast trays he once left outside her door were now brought in by him personally, always accompanied by a quiet, "Good morning." They spoke little, but even silence between them no longer felt like punishment. One afternoon she found him in the library, standing beside a wall of books that stretched to the ceiling. He looked up from a file when she entered, his eyes scanning her carefully. "You do not have to keep hiding in your room," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "I am not hiding," she replied. "I just do not know what to do here." Ethan closed the file and gestured to the shelves. "Then start by reading something that is not about medicine. Maybe a story will help you breathe." It was the first time he had ever spoken to her without the weight of command. Over the following days, small routines began to form between them. They shared quiet lunches in the garden, short walks along the balcony overlooking the sea, and moments where laughter returned in shy, fleeting bursts. Claire learned that Ethan's favorite place in the mansion was the observatory on the roof. One evening he invited her there. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, and for the first time since their wedding, He looked at peace. "I used to come up here with my father," he said, his voice low. "He told me that stars are proof that even in the darkest sky, there is light waiting to be seen." Claire smiled softly. He was right. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You are not afraid of me anymore," he said. "Maybe I just stopped expecting the worst," she answered. He turned toward the telescope and adjusted it with care. "Do you see that one?" he asked, pointing toward a faint glimmer near the horizon. "That is Vega. It burns brighter than it looks. Distance makes everything seem smaller, weaker. I think people are like that too." Claire leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his arm. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them felt charged, fragile, real. Ethan looked down, his voice almost a whisper. "I never meant for things to become this way." She met his gaze, her heartbeat unsteady. "Then why did you?" He hesitated, searching for words. "Because control was all I had left. And you made me realize how empty that really was." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from below. Ethan's assistant appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale. "Sir, there is an issue with the board meeting tomorrow. Mr. Hale is demanding to review the financials from the charity branch." Ethan's jaw tensed. "Tell him I will handle it." The man nodded and left quickly. Claire recognized the name immediately, Victor Hale, the investor Ethan had mentioned only once, the man whose ambition seemed to threaten everything. She saw the worry in Ethan's face before he could hide it. "He is trying to undermine you," she said. Ethan exhaled slowly. "He will not succeed, but he will try to use you to do it." "Me?" Claire frowned. "Why?" "Because the easiest way to break a man," Ethan said bitterly, "is through what he starts to care about." That night, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind tangled with confusion. She had promised herself she would never feel sympathy for him, never allow her heart to bend under his power. Yet the man she had married out of fear was no longer just a monster of her nightmares. He was complicated, broken, and painfully human. The next morning, as she descended the stairs, she heard voices from Ethan's office. She paused outside the door. Victor Hale's tone was sharp, venomous. "A forced marriage, Ethan? Really? That is a scandal waiting to happen. The board will not tolerate it." Ethan's reply was calm but cold. "It was legal." "Legal does not mean moral," Hale snapped. "She is a liability. You will end this farce, or I will make sure the world knows every detail." Claire's breath caught as the sound of glass shattering followed. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding. When the door finally opened, Hale stormed past her without a glance, his expression full of hatred. Inside, Ethan stood motionless, blood trickling from his hand where the glass had broken. She rushed to him without thinking. "You are bleeding," she said, grabbing a cloth from the desk. He tried to pull away, but she held firm, pressing it against his palm. "You should not have heard that," he muttered. "I heard enough," she replied. "He wants to destroy you, and he will use me to do it." Ethan met her eyes, his voice hoarse. "Then do not let him. Stay close, no matter what happens." For the first time, his plea did not sound like an order. It sounded like fear, and as she looked at him, her heart whispered something terrifying. She no longer wanted to leave. Now, let us return to our main character. The following day arrived with a tension that could be felt even in the air. The Ward estate was unusually busy. Staff members moved quickly through the halls, preparing for the charity gala that Ethan Ward hosted every spring. This one, however, was different. The board had insisted it go on, despite the rumors circling his personal life. Claire Monroe stood at her vanity, adjusting a silver gown chosen for her by Ethan's assistant. It shimmered under the soft light, elegant yet uncomfortably symbolic. She was no longer just a nurse in scrubs. She was Mrs. Ward, the woman the press could not stop talking about. Her stomach tightened with anxiety. Downstairs, Ethan was giving final instructions to the event coordinator. His suit immaculate, his composure carefully crafted. When their eyes met across the grand foyer, something inside her softened despite everything that had happened. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "As ready as I will ever be," she said. His jaw tightened slightly, a mix of pride and guilt flickering behind his expression. The gala began at sunset. Soft music filled the ballroom, and cameras flashed as investors, politicians, and journalists mingled among crystal chandeliers. Every smile was calculated, every conversation a transaction. Claire stayed close to Ethan, following the rhythm he set, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They moved as one, the perfect picture of a powerful couple. But beneath that image, she could feel his unease growing. Victor Hale was there, of course, prowling the crowd like a shark, his smile sharp and cold. When their eyes met, he raised his glass toward her in mock respect. She forced herself to look away. Midway through the evening, Ethan was called to speak. He walked to the stage, his presence commanding the room instantly. Tonight, he began, we are not here just to celebrate wealth, but to remember why we have it: to build, to heal, to give back. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing, but when his gaze met Claire's across the crowd, it faltered for a heartbeat. There are people in this world, he continued, who remind us that compassion is not weakness. Sometimes it takes the purest hearts to show us what power truly means. The audience applauded, unaware that every word was directed at her. As the speech ended, Victor approached the stage, clapping too loudly. "Beautiful words, Ethan," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Perhaps we should also applaud your unconventional marriage." The room fell silent. Cameras turned. Claire's heart stopped. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "This is not the place," he warned. "Oh, I think it is," Victor sneered. "Does everyone here know that your perfect wife was forced into this marriage under contract? Or that her mother's surgery was your bargaining chip?" Gasps rippled through the room like a wave. Claire felt her vision blur. Before she could move, Ethan stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Enough," he said sharply. "You are finished, Victor." But Victor only smirked, pulling a document from his pocket. "Not yet. The truth always finds its way out." He handed the papers to a reporter standing nearby, ensuring every camera caught the moment. Ethan's hand clenched into a fist, his composure slipping. The humiliation in his eyes was raw, but it was nothing compared to the ache in Claire's chest. She had wanted honesty, but not like this. The chaos was instant, voices rising, flashes blinding. Claire turned away, tears stinging her eyes. Ethan reached for her arm. "Claire, please." She pulled back. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Did you really use my mother's life as a weapon?" The silence that followed was his answer. She walked out, her heels echoing against the marble, each step heavier than the last. The paparazzi followed, shouting her name, their flashes slicing through the night. Outside, rain began to fall again, cold and relentless. She did not look back. Behind her, Ethan stood frozen on the stage, watching the only person who had ever seen through his armor disappear into the storm. The gala continued, but the empire he had built on control began to crumble from the inside. Later that night, alone in his study, he stared at the empty chair across from him, the glass of whiskey untouched. For the first time, the silence was unbearable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring she had worn, its silver band glinting under the dim light. He whispered her name once, softly, as if saying it could undo everything that had just happened. But the only answer was the rain against the windows, steady and unforgiving. Now, let us return to our main character. The city lights blurred through the rain as Claire Monroe walked aimlessly down the street, her silver gown clinging to her like a ghost of the night she wanted to forget. Cameras had followed her until she turned into a narrow alley and disappeared into the dark. She kept walking until her feet ached, until the sound of thunder drowned the echo of her name shouted by strangers. When she finally stopped, she found herself standing in front of the old hospital where she used to work before everything changed. The familiar scent of antiseptic and coffee drifted from the emergency entrance. Without thinking, she walked in. The night shift nurse, a friend named Maria, froze when she saw her. "Claire? Oh my God, you okay?" Claire forced a weak smile. "I just needed somewhere quiet." Maria led her to the staff room and handed her a blanket and a cup of tea. "The whole world is talking about you," Maria said softly. "They say you married him for money." Claire looked down, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. "Maybe they are right," she whispered. "Or maybe I married him because I had no choice." Meanwhile, back at the Ward estate, Ethan stood alone in his office, surrounded by shattered glass and silence. The news had spread faster than fire. Every network, every headline, every investor was demanding answers. His empire trembled under the weight of one truth: he had built everything on control, and now it was slipping through his hands. Victor Hale's accusations had not just exposed his private life. They had cracked open every secret he had tried to bury. He had been ruthless, but for the first time, he felt powerless. On his desk lay two things: the contract Claire had signed and a small silver ring she had left behind. He picked up the ring, closing his fist around it until his knuckles turned white. "You wanted the truth, Claire," he murmured. "Now the world has it, and I have lost you." The following morning, Claire woke to the sound of monitors beeping and patients talking outside the room. For a moment, it felt like she had gone back in time, back to the woman she used to be, before Ethan Ward, before the lies. But reality caught up quickly. The television in the break room was playing footage from the gala. The headlines bold: "Billionaire's fake marriage scandal." She turned it off, unable to bear the sound of his name. Yet part of her still ached to know if he was okay. That thought alone frightened her more than the storm outside. She packed her things quietly and left the hospital before sunrise. 2 days passed with no word from Ethan. His lawyers called, his assistant sent messages, but she refused to answer. It was not anger that kept her silent, it was exhaustion. Then, on the third evening, a black car stopped outside the small apartment she had rented near the city outskirts. A man stepped out holding an envelope. "Mrs. Ward," he said. "Mr. Ethan asked me to deliver this personally." Her heart skipped. She took the envelope and closed the door before the man could say more. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink slightly smudged as if written in haste. "Claire," it began, "I once told you I only trusted people who could not be bought. I realize now that trust is not earned through power, it is given through truth. You were right about me. I have spent my whole life trying to own everything, and in the process, I lost the only thing that ever mattered, someone who saw me as more than what I built. If you ever forgive me, do not come back because of the promise I made you. Come back because you still see something worth saving. Ethan." Claire held the letter for a long time. His words felt raw, unpolished, almost painful in their honesty. She read it again and again until tears blurred the ink. Somewhere inside, she wanted to believe him. But believing meant opening the same wound again, and she was not ready. That night, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside her bed. She whispered to herself, "Maybe someday." Across the city, Ethan watched the same rain fall against the glass walls of his office. His company board had suspended him temporarily. Victor Hale had taken control of several projects, and the future looked uncertain. But none of it mattered to him. He had spent years chasing empires, but the only thing he wanted now was forgiveness. He stood by the window, the city glowing below, and whispered her name once more. Somewhere out there, Claire was staring at the same storm, and though miles apart, they both felt the same question burn quietly inside their hearts. Was it too late to start over? Now, let us return to our main character. The days that followed were quiet, but silence could not hide the storm building beneath the surface. Claire Monroe tried to return to a normal life. She took extra shifts at the hospital, moved through each day like a ghost, and told herself that she had left the past behind. Yet Ethan Ward lingered in every thought, every heartbeat, every quiet moment between patients. His letter sat in her drawer, the edges worn from being read too many times. Sometimes, late at night, she caught herself tracing the ink with her fingers, wondering if a man like him could really change. But doubts still outweighed hope. Forgiveness, she thought, was a language she had forgotten how to speak. Across the city, Ethan was fighting a war he no longer cared to win. His empire had begun to crumble. Investors were pulling out, the media painted him as a manipulative fraud, and Victor Hale had begun consolidating control over the board. Every day, another headline shredded his reputation, yet none of it hurt as much as the silence from Claire. For the first time in years, Ethan stopped showing up at his office. He ignored calls, canceled meetings, and shut himself inside the mansion that had once been his fortress. It now felt more like a cage. One night, while he sat by the fire nursing the emptiness that no whiskey could dull, his assistant, Daniel, burst through the door. "Sir, you need to see this," he said breathlessly, holding out a folder. Ethan frowned and took it. Inside were transaction records and internal memos, evidence that Victor Hale had been siphoning funds from Ward Biotech's charitable foundation for years. The very foundation that had financed Claire's mother's surgery. "He framed me," Ethan muttered, disbelief tightening his voice. Daniel nodded grimly. "He used your forced marriage scandal to divert attention from his crimes. He wanted you destroyed so no one would look at him." For the first time in weeks, something inside Ethan snapped back to life. The anger was cold, focused, and purposeful. "Gather everything," he ordered. "Every document, every witness. We are going to bring him down." Daniel hesitated. "You cannot do it alone, Ethan. You need someone who believes you. Ethan looked up, his eyes dark but steady. The one person who believed in me left. But fate, as it often does, had its own plans. That same night, Claire was finishing a late shift when she overheard two doctors talking in the hallway. "Did you see the news?" one of them said. "Ward Biotech's accounts, they found irregularities. Apparently, Hale was behind the charity embezzlement." Claire froze. "Are you sure?" she asked, stepping forward. The doctor nodded. "They are investigating. Looks like Ethan Ward might have been set up all along." The world tilted for a moment. Everything she had believed about him, every wound she carried, shifted under the weight of that single truth. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and ran out into the rain. By the time she reached the Ward estate, it was past midnight. The iron gates were half open, the security lights dim. She stepped inside, her heels echoing softly on the wet pavement. Inside, the house was dark except for a faint glow from the study. She found Ethan there, surrounded by papers, exhaustion written in every line of his face. He looked up, stunned. "Claire," he breathed, as if saying her name could make her real again. For a moment, neither moved. Then she stepped closer. "I heard about Hale," she said. "Is it true?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It is. I should have told you sooner, but I did not want you to think I was trying to justify everything I did." She stared at him, searching his eyes for the man she once feared and the one she had come to understand. "You were wrong to force me," she said quietly. "But you were right about one thing: you do not give up." Ethan took a step closer, his voice trembling. "I do not deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," she replied, "but you deserve a chance to make it right." He looked at her then, hope flickering behind years of regret. "You came back," he said softly. "I came back for the truth," she answered, "not for you. But maybe the truth is what will save us both." Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time the rain felt different. It was no longer washing away the past, it was clearing the ground for something new. As they stood in that dimly lit room, surrounded by the wreckage of their mistakes, a fragile understanding took root. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was the beginning of something close. And for the first time, both of them felt what they had never known before. Peace, quiet and tentative, like the first breath after a long storm. Now, let us return to our main character. The next morning, sunlight crept through the tall windows of the Ward estate, touching the piles of files scattered across the floor like traces of a long battle fought through the night. Ethan Ward had not slept, but exhaustion was replaced by clarity. Claire Monroe sat across from him, a cup of untouched coffee in her hands, her eyes scanning the evidence that confirmed everything Victor Hale had stolen millions from the Foundation, using the chaos of the scandal to cover his crimes. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "He used your mother's case to make the transfer look legitimate. He made it seem like charity money was funding private treatment." Claire's jaw tightened. "He used my pain to destroy you." Ethan looked up at her, guilt flashing across his face. "No, Claire. I destroyed myself long before Hale ever tried." They spent the morning assembling the final report for the authorities. Claire watched as Ethan moved with focus and quiet determination. The arrogance that once defined him was gone. In its place stood a man stripped bare of ego, fueled only by the need to make things right. When the call came from the district attorney's office, Ethan's voice was steady. "Everything you need is in that file," he said. "The board will want to protect their name, but the truth should speak louder." He ended the call and exhaled slowly. "It is done." For a moment, silence lingered between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Claire looked at him, studying the lines of his face. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan gave a faint smile, one that carried both sorrow and peace. "Now, the truth decides what we deserve." By noon, the police had raided Victor Hale's offices. The news spread quickly: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Reporters flooded the streets, but this time, Ethan did not hide. He held a press conference on the steps of Ward Biotech. Cameras flashed, microphones surrounded him, and his voice carried through the noise with a calm strength that surprised everyone. "I made mistakes," he began. "I let pride and control blind me. I hurt the people I should have protected. But what happened in my company, what Victor Hale did, goes beyond me. The truth matters more than reputation, and for once, I intend to face it." Claire watched from the crowd, her heart pounding. Every word he spoke stripped away another layer of the man she had once feared. When he finished, the applause was hesitant, but real. As he stepped away from the podium, their eyes met through the sea of cameras. It was a single moment, quiet, human, honest. That evening back at the estate, Ethan found Claire standing by the garden terrace, looking out over the water. The air was cool, touched by the scent of rain from the night before. "You should not be here," he said softly, though his tone lacked conviction. She turned to him, her expression calm. "If I had not come back, you would have faced all this alone. I could not let that happen." He took a step closer. "Why? After everything I did to you, why help me?" She hesitated, then spoke with quiet certainty. "Because somewhere beneath all the damage, I saw a man who wanted to be better. You just needed someone to remind you how." Ethan's voice lowered to a whisper. "And what about you? What do you need, Claire?" Her gaze softened. "Closure. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe both." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same silver ring she had left behind, the one that had once symbolized a contract built on coercion. He placed it on the table beside her. "I do not expect you to wear it again," he said. "But I wanted you to have it back, not as a reminder of what I took from you, but of what you survived." Claire stared at the ring, her throat tight. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You kept it." "I kept everything," Ethan replied, his voice unsteady. "Every word you said. Every moment you looked at me and did not turn away." They stood in silence, the waves crashing softly against the shore beyond the garden. It was not a reconciliation yet. It was something quieter, a fragile understanding between two people who had finally stopped lying to themselves and to each other. Claire turned toward the house, pausing in the doorway. "You are not the man I married," she said. Ethan looked at her, uncertain. She smiled faintly. "That is a good thing." When she left, Ethan stayed on the terrace until the sky faded into gold. For the first time in years, the mansion felt less like a prison and more like a promise, a place where truth had finally taken root. He closed his eyes and whispered her name. Not as a plea this time, but as a prayer. Somewhere in the distance, Claire walked away from the estate, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Both of them carried scars, but both were finally free from the lies that had once bound them. Now, let us return to our main character. Months passed, and spring returned to the city with quiet grace. The chaos that once consumed the headlines had faded, replaced by stories of restoration and rebuilding. Ward Biotech had survived, reborn under new leadership and renewed transparency. Victor Hale faced trial, his crimes exposed in every detail, while Ethan Ward stepped down as CEO and turned his focus toward the foundation that had once been tainted by corruption. The world saw him as a man humbled by consequence, but those who truly knew him, few as they were, understood it was not defeat that had changed him, but love, the kind that strips a person down to their truth. Claire Monroe had moved on as well. She returned to her work at the hospital, not as the woman running from her past, but as one who had finally made peace with it. Her mother's health had improved, and every time Claire walked through the sterile halls of the ward, she felt a sense of quiet pride. She had survived the kind of storm that leaves no one untouched, and somehow she had come out stronger. Yet sometimes, when the day grew still, her mind would drift back to the man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. It was a late afternoon in May when she received an invitation in the mail. There was no sender's name, just a seal she recognized instantly, the Ward Foundation. Inside was a simple card, dedication ceremony, the Monroe Medical Wing. Her breath caught. At the bottom, in Ethan's handwriting, were 5 words that made her heart tremble. For truth, for what matters. 2 days later, she stood at the entrance of the new hospital wing, the crowd murmuring softly as reporters took photos. The sign above the door gleamed in the sunlight, bearing her family's name. When Ethan appeared, dressed in a simple dark suit, the world seemed to still for a moment. He looked different, lighter, grounded, human. As he stepped to the podium, he met her gaze before addressing the audience. "This place," he said, "is more than a building. It is proof that redemption is not about undoing the past, but about building something honest from it." His voice wavered slightly. "It is dedicated to the people who remind us that compassion, even when born in pain, is still the most powerful force there is." The applause rose gently, sincere and warm. After the ceremony, Claire found him standing alone by the garden outside the new wing. The spring breeze carried the faint scent of lilies. "You did not have to name it after me," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "It was not for you," he replied. "It was for the woman who taught me that love is not control, You just happened to be her. She looked at him, words failing for a moment. So this is goodbye? She asked. Ethan shook his head. No, Claire, this is truth. Whatever we were before, we are free now. And maybe freedom is what love was always meant to be. She took a deep breath, her heart steady but full. You are right, she said. But maybe love also deserves a second chance. Ethan's eyes searched hers, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Then she smiled, small but real. Do not make me regret it. His laugh was quiet, a sound she had not heard since the night everything began. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never do. As the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the garden, they stood side by side, two souls bound not by contracts or promises, but by truth. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out the silver ring he had given her long ago. She turned it in her hand, the engraved words catching the light, Veritas Vincit, truth wins. Without ceremony, she slipped it back onto her finger. Ethan exhaled, emotion flickering behind his eyes. Does this mean what I think it means? He asked quietly. Claire nodded. It means we start over, no contracts, no fear, just us. He smiled, reaching for her hand, and together they walked through the garden, leaving behind the ghosts of their past. The wind carried their laughter softly into the evening, mingling with the sound of hope reborn. And as they disappeared into the light of the setting sun, one truth remained unshaken. Love built on honesty never truly ends. Now, let us return to our main character.